Last week, we talked about first impressions, memorable moments, and childhood recollections of The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This week, on part 2 of our journey through the SNES classic, we explore the game's legacy, share more memories, and talk about that other Super Nintendo Zelda game. You know, that other one. You look a little confused. Don't worry, so was I. Mike Albertin of Games My Mom Found, followed by Moses, aka the well-read mage of thepixels.com, and finally Seth Sergel of the All End podcast, start us off on the top of the Triforce Part 2, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Thinking back to your experience with Link to the Past, either modern day or back in the day, what are some memorable moments from that game that really stick with you?
Well, one that's not too far away, not too long ago, when I did it for the podcast Game My Mom Found, I got Jeff Cork, who worked at Game Informer at the time, to come on for the first time. So that's one thing that will always stick with me now. I mean, it's not, it's a newer memory, but it's something that will always stick with me. But a lot of it that come back, it's just remember being a kid, remember having my dad kind of sitting there watching it, because he liked to watch me play games, but it had to be a game to him that was interesting. Like, he liked platformers, he liked adventure games. He didn't like an RPG where I just sit and do random battles for 3 hours to level up. He didn't like that. He wanted to see things happening, and Zelda, there's usually stuff happening. And he always, and I have a vague memory when I first played the game, and I playing at night, I just got the game, my mom brought it home, and you go in the first area that you go to, you're knocking people off into the darkness, and they go, and then they shake a little bit, then they go falling down, and that has always stuck with me, because my dad thought it was hilarious. For some reason, he thought it was just so funny when they fell.
Oh, that's cool.
Still does. And it was one of those things that just kind of stuck with me, too.
That's cool. And it was a simple little piece of animation that brought out a little connective tissue, because I think as kids, it was harder for us to, video games were so new to our parents. Like, they didn't understand it. And when we have kids, my kids, and I'm sure your son, when they understand what games are, right? Yes. They know what video games are. It's a part of the culture now, where our parents just didn't get it, right? Like, they just didn't understand what this thing was, what the attraction was. So any little thing, and that's probably why it sticks in your brain, any little thing that connects with a parent in a game that you love is important. Because you're like, oh, validation, this thing is fun. See, this is why you spent $60 on this game and $200 on a console. See, it's cool. Yeah, my dad was the same way. I think very similar story. When my dad set up my NES, I think I had Rad Racer and Black Box Baseball. And he used to like watching me play Rad Racer, because it's a simple it's racing. It's car racing. He doesn't like car racing, but it's something simple and relatable to the real world that he understood. It wasn't Mario jumping on toadstools and Goombas, and you know what I mean? Like, it was something related to the real world. Baseball. Yeah. I know what baseball is. This game is baseball you get to play on a TV. So I think it's very interesting. Your dad got a kick out of at the expense of the guards and the knights you were plummeting to their death.
He loved it. He still laughed. If I was to play the game in front of him, he'd still laugh at it. He would still find it hilarious when they dropped down, and that's something that's always stuck with me.
Another thing that was, again, an incredible moment in Link to the Past was the Dark World. When you take on, I'm always going to mess up the name, Agahim. Yeah, something like that. I'm sure someone will yell at us. When you take on him, he feels like the final boss. Kind of, sort of. Not this big epic thing that we've seen before, but for a Super Nintendo game, you come from the NES, I remember thinking, I guess this is the boss. Sweet, how do I beat this guy? And then finally realizing the secret to defeating him. And then you're just plopped into the Dark World, and you're a bunny rabbit, and you're like, I remember thinking, what is happening? Do you remember how you felt when you uncovered that little?
Yeah, it was the same sort of experience. I mean, these games, because of their size, I think uniquely were really good at doing this. Same thing as like when you fight Magus in Chrono Trigger. And here's my quota for Chrono Trigger references. Like when you beat Magus and you're like, I think that was maybe the end of the game. But then you get thrown into, prehistory. And you're like, oh, shoot, there's, a whole, like, I remember talking with a young guy who was playing through this for the first time earlier this year. And he's like, this game's all right. I mean, I just, Dark Lord and stuff like that. I was like, just wait. Okay, just wait. And he gets up to Magus. He's like, it was really easy and stuff like that. And then like he's kind of chatting as he's playing it. And he's like, oh, snap. And then, he goes a little further in the thing. You're like, oh, okay. Like this game just kind of unfolds, same sort of thing with this. And I challenge you, the Dark World too is really part of the iconography, part of the texture of the Zelda series is having that parallel world that maybe isn't really quite in Breath of the Wild, because Breath of the Wild does focus so much on that exploration primacy. But the idea of there being two worlds, two parallel worlds, or two different means of traveling in the same world, whether that's by ocean or, you're in the sky, or here there's a dark world, or Minish Cap, I think is a really, really great twist on that idea of the dual worlds. That I think is just really well done in A Link to the Past. Where you're not quite expecting it, and then when it happens, you're like, "Oh, okay, yeah." So there's actually a lot here, and what I thought was going to be, a fairly truncated game, ends up being a much broader game. And I think it's a great way to not make one overworld map really huge and kind of cumbersome. Yeah. But just kind of having two that you can explore.
I think it's very elegant way of approaching that problem of making something too big. Just make the same thing twice, just with different elements in the second one and some different challenges. I definitely think it was a really smart and again elegant way of approaching that. People often state it as this kind of very cinematic experience, especially at the beginning. I remember playing it. I didn't own it as a kid. I had cousins who had it. So I only played it when I was their house, and that wasn't very often. So I only experienced it as an adult. When you played, and you said you played it as a kid. Yeah. When you play as a kid, can you recall how it felt with those opening area, rain slashing down, this very cinematic opening? Do you remember how you felt, like what that feeling was for you?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't cinematic. I'll tell you that, because I think adults say that, I think adults are like, oh, it's so cinematic. Kids are, well, at least none that I've met, and certainly not myself when I was a kid, say, oh, it's so cinematic.
That's very fair.
I think it's poetic. Point. Also, I wouldn't have said that, when I was 6 or whatever, when I first played this thing. Maybe a little older than that. I don't know. Time is hard. Yeah.
Time's a thing.
But it has all that, to borrow an imperfect word from earlier, it has all that drama to it. It has all that sense of scale, of something really happening, of a story starting on a dark and stormy night. It has that kind of sense of immediacy and danger to it that I think really is palpable and important for an adventure story to start off not completely idle. It is interesting to think about like how many Zelda games start with the character sleeping. Like, why? But it doesn't just, kind of let you wake up and then you go about your day and then something happens. It's interesting that you're sleeping and you hear a voice or something wakes you up and, oh no, there's danger right away. And I think that in the craft of storytelling, if you start somebody in on the action right away, that's a lot more engaging than some of the other games that I've played. Typically some JRPGs, where it'll just be like, you just start the game and you're like, everything's handy dandy for like a week before, like the Empire shows up or the demons fly out of the mountain or the dragon comes or anything like that.
Right.
Like I'm thinking of Ocarina of Time, Link to the Past. where something happens right away. So I feel like that kind of immediacy is really what I felt like. Oh, okay, like we need to go out now. Like if you're as a kid, if like, is it your dad that goes off and dies and you get the sword in A Link to the Past?
I think it's your uncle. Okay. Is that right?
So your guardian figure.
Father figure. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, think about that for a child. Like, there is maybe nothing scarier than losing your guardian figure. If they're truly your guardian figure. I'm not just saying, like, people have had, rough times with their parents and the people who are in charge of them. But affording for that, if you're relying on that adult person and they're suddenly just gone, they die in front of you, or they go off into the rain and you're not sure if they're coming back, that's terrifying. So scary. So I think that, especially for children, is a really great way to start A Link to the Past.
And that's why I like to bring this up, because you're 100% right. And that's, as you were talking, I kind of flashed to that. As a kid, it's all of your fears. Like, it really is, right? Wake up alone in your home, right? You're not supposed to be alone in your home as a kid, right? You don't expect that. You're in your room, but you wake up alone in your home. It's raining. It's thunder and lightning. You don't know where anybody is. That's a very, very striking opening for a game that is being played by primarily, kids, 11 and 12-year-olds, right? I mean, that's kind of where that kind of lied. So I think it was also very brave of the developers to go that route, and to do that, kind of make their tutorializing part of this really intense and frankly, scary moment. The one thing I also love too about that opening is kind of the moment when you're leading the princess out from the castle. I always find that really interesting and smart. And it kind of, you can share your thoughts on it as well, but how it really establishes this relationship. Like it really establishes this like connection, this tethering between you and Zelda. That I think was very ingenious and smart in kind of developing kind of those connections and those themes.
Especially when you consider how absent Zelda is from the first two.
Yes.
Here having her, I think I remember being kind of surprised, like, oh, here's Zelda. Am I going to actually have to save her in this game? Because she's right here. But and of course, things wind up going down as things do. But yeah, I think that makes sense. It almost feels like you've got that weight of responsibility then there. It's you can see, that's required of you to actually physically lead her out. And that is very different, I think, than just saying, and by the way, there's a princess that you have no idea, who she really is, that you have to go rescue.
Right.
So again, like that, this game really takes what Zelda is. It still has the princess. It still has, Ganon. It still has all this evil and the darkness and stuff like that. It still has the kid with a sword. But it just elevates it. It just makes it more real.
What other memorable moments do you have from Link to the Past? Like those kind of standout moments in that game?
It's little tiny stuff, and this is always how it is with me in Zelda. Is like these little kind of moments that I remember that really stick with me, and just like the way I felt in those moments. I really liked the dungeons in that game. Like I still really like the dungeons in that game. I actually think that something that is kind of a I've been raked through the coals for this opinion over the years, but something I really liked about A Link Between Worlds, I actually prefer A Link Between Worlds overall to A Link to the Past, and that game is essentially a pseudo sequel to A Link to the Past. It's literally a sequel in Japan. It's called A Link to the Past 2.
Okay.
So A Link Between Worlds, I remember playing that game on 3DS and just the familiarity of it. Like I was able to just find my way through that world because I already knew it so well from my time in A Link to the Past. I thought that was such a cool feeling. But those dungeons, like I remember, coming on to little things like the Thieves' Town and just the vibes of that place, the swamp in the Dark World, going into the castle for the first time and seeing like your uncle who, when that game opens, you're given this whole like spiel about the setup of the world. And I think it says something about like Aghanim is, taking down the descendants of the sages and trying to break the sages' seal or, something like that. And then Link is woken up by the voice of Zelda kind of communicating with them almost telepathically. And your uncle, I think it's supposed to be your uncle, goes out and goes to Hyrule Castle and is in the dungeon and gets, defeated in the castle dungeon, and he has to pass all of that stuff on to you. And that's a little bit of a moment for me because, as I mentioned the last time we talked, Bill, my uncle was the one that introduced me to Zelda and to video games and all of this stuff in general. So like it was easy for me to kind of self-insert into A Link to the Past and imagine that was my uncle passing the sword and shield to me.
Wow.
And so it was easy for me to sort of imagine that and put myself kind of in those shoes. And another kind of striking thing that I remember about A Link to the Past, and you could, I think, do this in previous Zelda games, but I never really did. But in A Link to the Past, I named the character. I named myself. I named it Seth.
Right.
And I remember finding that very powerful. Like I just felt very connected, I think, for the first time to Link in a way that I didn't quite feel connected to that character in Zelda 1 or in Zelda 2. In A Link to the Past, I felt like it was me on this adventure. And I felt like that was my uncle in the dungeon. And that I remember that feeling very distinctively and that connection that I had to the character in the world.
Yeah, man. Thank you for sharing that because I can definitely see. I think self-identifying in this game is really an important piece of it because I think you could do it in Link to the. I'm pretty sure you could have done it in all of them. I'm pretty sure in the first Zelda you can name your character, but it's never really verbalized. Obviously,
right?
I'm not sure if in Zelda 2 if it will say your name. I don't think so. I don't think
really. So. But then A Link to the Past, it's done like a lot. Like the characters will talk to you, and it just felt more true. Like it just felt more real.
Yeah, and I think also in Link to the Past, it allowed you to where in previous games you was just naming a save file. Like, oh, this is my save file, Bobby's the other save file, and that way we know which is which. In this game, it was identifying a character and, like you said, inserting yourself in that character so you can have that adventure, and feel a lot of agency. People, Zelda is addressing you.
Right.
And I think there's something powerful in that. I really do. I really think there's very powerful stuff in there where you can really insert yourself and be a part of the narrative.
Yeah, that was definitely something that I think I was looking for a lot in video games as a kid, and I think that definitely solidified my connection to the Zelda franchise in general. Was like I had all of these very like sort of precious memories. A lot of people kind of equate Mario and Duck Hunt and stuff like that to the games that sort of made them gamers, and they were for me too. But sure. Zelda was the franchise that made me say, I love video games. And so much of that is because of these seeds that were planted in this game. Nice. And, and again, just like that sense of atmosphere. I remember the first time you go to the Dark World in that game is a very like memorable moment for me because, again, it's atmosphere and tone. It's like, I'd never really experienced a feeling like that in a video game before where you're this little like pink rabbit and you're like, what in the world is going on right now? like I just, until you get that, what is it? The moon pearl or whatever to change back. Like you're just kind of like lost and hopeless in this dark world. And it just really captured that in a way that just wasn't possible with video games before. And I think that A Link to the Past really kind of showed me what was possible, the emotional responses that were possible with video games.
I think you hit on something really important, especially with the the Dark World, where it's a disempowerment unlike anything, like you said, I'd experienced. Even Metroid, where, you have the classic, hey, Samus has all her stuff, and then boom, she loses all her stuff. But we were still a ways away from that kind of trope. You have nothing. I remember, and I didn't own it. I played it at friends' houses and cousins' houses. I remember the first time I saw that at a cousin's house, probably, and him saying, oh, yeah, I can't do anything. And then I grabbed the controller. I'm like, yeah, the B button doesn't work. Like, it doesn't, I don't have anything. Like, what do I do? And the answer is nothing. Right. You do nothing. You just avoid and run and hope for the best. It's a really powerful feeling just in removing agency from a character.
Yeah. And there's such that whole just concept is really interesting, and maybe not, especially held up to modern scrutiny. Maybe the Dark World is like a bit obtuse and things like that. And, going back, I'd be really interested to know how people sort of react to that going back and playing it for the first time now in 2022. But back then, it just sort of felt like quiet and lost and, I don't know, helpless in an interesting way, in a way that I'd never really felt in a video game before. That's a very strong memory for me.
If you remember, you're I can't pronounce the wizard's name. Aghanim
is how I always said it. Yeah.
Aghanim, I like that. I'll take it. When you take on Aghanim, you would be, especially if you had not played Zelda 2, you'd be forgiven if you thought that was really the final boss. Like, oh, okay, Aghanim, cool. All right, and even though the game does hint that there's a larger force controlling actions here, throughout that, you would not be silly to think he's it. That's the last enemy, and then you get dropped into the Dark World, and it's like, oh boy, this game is just expanded, and it's now, the stakes are up because this just looks foreboding. It's not pleasant and sunny out. There's lightning. It just the whole situation is really, really crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because I did absolutely think that was it. Because I think what you end up having to do, you fight him, and then if I remember correctly, I think he sort of like phases back behind these like curtains that you're supposed to cut down and chase him through.
I think so.
But I didn't pick up on that. Maybe I was too young or something. I don't know. But like, it took me a while to realize that was what I was supposed to do. And I was like, did I just beat the game? I was like, was this it? Like, okay, like, I guess I just beat it. But then, after a few minutes of sort of futzing around, I figured out what I was supposed to do. But I do remember distinctly, feeling like that was the final boss and that was it. And then, oh wait, no, it's just getting started. I will say too, something that I think that A Link Between Worlds actually improved upon from A Link to the Past is A Link to the Past for me feels somewhat desolate. Like there are kind of like side characters and things like that, but it was a little bit weird to me to play that game and feel like the world was fairly empty, especially after playing Zelda 2, where it's very, very populated. It felt like we were going back to Zelda 1 in more ways than one. Not only just in like the kind of return to that classic gameplay formula, but the vibes of it, the world being so much more empty. Whereas in Zelda 1, to me, it made a little bit more sense because it was like wilderness environments and stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In A Link to the Past, it makes like, it's still desolate, but it doesn't make as much sense to me.
Know what makes sense? I mean, real good old-fashioned sense, common sense that everyone should own. If you listen to this show for any length of time, you should know exactly where I'm going with this. Becoming one of my patrons. It's as simple as going to patreon.com/agamerlooks@40, slapping down 2 thin bucks, and joining the likes of Patrice Millette, the Let's Play Princess, BT Goebbels, Tim Knowles of Letus, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, Seth Sergil of the All In Podcast, Dan of Retro Logic, Ryan Payne of Gamers Week, and Pete Harney. Check out the site, pick a tier, there's only 2, I make it easy, and if you feel so inclined, sign up. We'd love to have you. Let's get back to the episode. Whenever a conversation starts about Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, ignoring legacy is nearly impossible. Other games, you can kind of stick to how you felt about it, opinions, mechanics, graphics, sound. But when a game is as capital I important as Zelda 3 on the Super Nintendo, you have to bring up just how important this game was, not only for Nintendo, but for video games in general. I mean, if you had to pick a top 3 most important game for the Super Nintendo, off the top of my head, without even thinking too much, Mario World, obviously, Donkey Kong, because it extended the life of that system, past its prime to keep pace with the Genesis. And then Link to the Past. I mean, with all the role-playing games and everything else that the console delivered, Link to the Past is still in that conversation. So now we're going to talk a bit about that legacy and how this game continues to hold up and hold its value, not only in historical context, but how it still feels in your hand right now. Starting us off is Steve Luzader. Haven't heard from him in a while, so glad he's back. Andrew Craig returns, and then Blue and Donnie from the Gamers Week podcast.
What SNES game do you think made a particular impact on you, like a personal impact on you?
The thing is it's hard probably to limit it to one game, I would think, just because because there's a lot of, like, to this day, I'll die on the hill that I think A Link to the Past is the greatest game ever made. It is probably the closest thing I've ever played in 35 plus years to a perfect game. Wow. It's still visually compelling when you look at it today. The soundtrack is amazing. It paces itself perfectly well. It's actiony. It's fun. And it was just, that game was very enriching. But to see the graphical leap as well, like pretty much the first game anybody plays is Super Mario World. Most people. Right. But that graphical leap that you see from the end of the NES to the SNES is like you see with any console leap. It's just this phenomenal, eye-catching sort of, wow, this is what gaming looks like now. And so there's that bit of impact there.
I've asked this question a lot to people, and I would say half the answers are that Link to the Past. What do you think about it made that impact? I know you brought up a lot of really good points, but what about it just hit us so hard as kids? Like, I didn't play a lot of it as a kid, Link to the Past. I had a cousin who had it, and I played at his house, but I never owned it myself. So I only experienced it like later in life. What about that game really just grabbed you?
I think the thing is kind of going back to what I had mentioned. It's the way that the game had stepped itself up from the original Legend of Zelda. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with the original Legend of Zelda. Again, it is still in its own right a phenomenal game. But when you take A Link to the Past and you're playing it, and like you said a few seconds ago about Mega Man X, it feels great in your hand. But you're looking at these gorgeously crisp, pixelated graphics. And between just the gameplay, the soundtrack gave you this almost more orchestral feel to it. Now, we didn't get into the true orchestral soundtracks, to the PlayStation era when Final Fantasy VII hit. Right. But we got this. It wasn't just the chiptune music that we were used to. And again, nothing wrong with chiptune music. I still love listening to old 8-bit Mega Man tunes, but
for sure,
there was this depth to the music that hits you. The songs that I still in my head I'm replaying because they were just that implanted. And the way that they could stretch the story a little bit longer because you had that, a little more memory and a little more space to work with, just like you do with every console generation.
Right.
And was able to enrich the story and the experience. And it's just this perfect little Easter basket of awesome, just wrapped up and given to you.
Yeah, and it's the story too, I think, is so I don't want to say downplayed in Link to the Past because everyone knows the story, but the story itself is very straightforward, right? It's a standard kind of save the princess, fare. But the way it's presented, especially in the open with the rain slashing down and defenseless, you go into this castle to get the sword from your fallen uncle. It's got some real emotional beats to it, which I think is a big piece of why that game works so well. And then that's why when it allows you to go on that journey, and when you're actually let loose in the world, you have that dramatic background. It's the roots are there. That way, when you go forth, you have a mission, you have some objective.
Yeah, and the game was also, it gave you this extra element, this little slight extra element of exploration, because also too, we had the whole dark world thing in Link to the Past. So now you're swapping worlds back and forth, and having to play these almost two-dimensional puzzles, but not like 2D as in two separate physical dimensions.
Right.
Trying to relocate yourself. Going up Zola Falls and finding him to get the flippers up there.
Yeah.
The fairies in the water fountain where you had to, you threw in special items to get the upgrade. It was just this nice, wonderful little extra that was already on top of a perfectly built game.
With Link to the Past, obviously there are tons of innovations and interesting ideas and good ideas in that. What do you think, other than the opening, of course, but what do you think really separates Link to the Past from other Zelda titles that makes it truly unique and interesting?
It's kind of a tough one because every Zelda title since then has cribbed from Link to the Past.
This is true.
A lot of it has lived on in every game in the series since then. But I think the concept of the world is not as simple as it looks. Link to the Past really set itself apart early on by the concept of you think you're near the end of the game, and then you find out that there's a dark world. And you have to explore that dark world. And when you first go into the dark world, you're a bunny.
Defenseless.
Yeah. But then you have to build yourself to the point where you can go into the dark world and actually confront everything there. And the idea that, holy crap, the entire world map is there too. And it's just little changes here and there. It's the color palette change. It's the shape of cliff sides. It's the enemies that you run into. That means that world map, which is so much bigger than the original Zelda,
for sure,
is doubled. Everything that everybody says about, Castlevania, Symphony of the Night,
right? Mm-hmm.
Link to the Past did first.
Yeah, I mean that's a fantastic point. And my first thought on that too is the dark world as well, because, like you said, it was like the map opened up to double the size. Like you didn't realize there was another page in the atlas, and all of a sudden says, no, here, there's more, and then you realize, oh man, there's double of what I expected. And I think the idea too that they had different rock formations, again, everything was basically the same, but it wasn't just a mirror image and a palette swap. They made interesting little changes and choices, which really shows a really cool intentionality. That again, that's just good design.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's sort of what really stands out to me is I feel like if it had just been a palette swap, it wouldn't be that impressive. But the fact that the world changes in really unique ways, there are holes in the floor where there weren't holes in the light world.
Right.
There are things blocking your path that didn't exist in the other world. It's the shape of this cliff is different than it was in the other world. Screen to screen, the light world and the dark world are very similar, but they're also very different places. And the fact that the first time you get to the dark world as a bunny, you're just starting to feel like you've got a handle on the light world. Mm-hmm. And then they go, no, you're not there yet.
Not there yet.
You've got a lot of growing to do still.
Yeah, and also I love the idea of the fake out final boss, where in the light world you take on Aghanim, is that right?
Everybody pronounces it differently. That tends to be the way I go.
Aghanim, okay, cool. That's when you take on that character, he feels like a final boss, kinda. Maybe not an impressive final boss, but
from a design perspective, he mirrors as far as the phases, the shape of the room that you're in, it mirrors in a lot of ways the Ganon fight from the first game.
Sure, absolutely.
And so it makes you feel like this is it. And then they go, nah, just messing with you. And give you a whole other half of the game.
Yeah, it's incredible. And you're right, because it does mirror that. And we've never had, there's only been 2 previous games, many people who have never played the second, right? Because of or never finished the second. So I could totally see how someone would think, oh yeah, this is it. Awesome. You know,
but, I know I did the first time I played it.
But most people will cite Link to the Past as at least the top 3 Zelda game. Why do you think a game that was made, in 92, I think, in 93, I forget which, why do you think a game made of that early 90s era has endured? Even because we talked about how the franchise has endured, why do you think Link to the Past still remains a top 3 game for most Zelda fans?
Yes, so to me, Super Nintendo games hold up better than most other generations. That particular combination of pixel art and color that they had, especially with the expertise that the developers had during that time, utilizing the hardware to the best of its ability, I really think Super Nintendo games, by and large, hold up. And then also I think that A Link to the Past it's a really compelling story right from the beginning, like we already discussed, where you jump in and it's dark and it's serious and it's rainy and there's death. And so right away you feel that things are really important. The story is moving. And then also it's a really doable game because you can play it in a single sitting, as opposed to something like Breath of the Wild, where unless you're some sort of crazy speedrunner, it's going to take you hours and hours and hours and hours.
You think you could do Link to the Past in a single sitting?
What? That would be, depends on what you call a sitting. I think you could probably, if you knew what you were doing, you could get through it in probably 2 hours. I don't know what the speedrun record is for Link to the Past. I'm sure it's something insane. But I know our friend Redox PDX has been doing a lot of like speed running of Legend of Zelda, and she's getting pretty close to those recommended times. So obviously it's a speed runnable game, but yeah. What's have you discovered?
An hour and 23 minutes?
Is that the record?
That is the current record.
Wow.
It's a flat 1 hour and 23 minutes and 0 seconds, and the one previous to that was an hour, 23 minutes and 9 seconds.
People are amazing. But yeah, so extrapolate that by me being 4 times as bad as that person, I'm sure. And I suspect you could probably get through in 4 to 5 hours. That's a rainy afternoon,
right?
Sitting,
and that's using a guide or whatever if you're not one of those people who have it memorized.
Right.
To be fair, I did look it up on how long to beat, and it says the main story takes 15 hours. So more than one sitting. Okay. More than one sitting if it's your first time through, but.
Next up, Greg Sewart returns along with Jeff of the New Dad Gaming Podcast, Lou Williams of Gamers Week, and Mike Albertin of Games My Mom Found. Why do you think Link to the Past still holds up?
I think it's a mixture of things. One is that it's just a very, very well-made game. Like I said, it's this wonderful refinement of what the original game was. So those who are old enough to have played the original game kind of, it's that next evolutionary step, which was great. I think the other thing is that we've learned, especially when you get to the mid-90s, that anything previous to early 3D games visually just hold up so well. They don't look relatively ugly in any way, and there's just a major nostalgia for it. Whereas early 3D games, you got into the whole technical limitations with the low poly models and developers sort of trying to figure out what the rules are as far as development goes, right? Whereas Link to the Past came out where all of the best developers, especially the best Japanese developers, I think, had so perfected their craft at that point, and it really shows in the games that were coming out in the early to mid 90s on like the 16-bit consoles, and some a little bit on the 32-bit when they weren't trying to do something new, right? Like the rules had been written, they'd been writing the rules for 15 years at that point, and like this is how you make a great game, and there were very few developers that were better at it than Nintendo at the time. So I think really it endures because it is a wonderful example of a development team that's just so on top of their game and has so perfected their craft. And it just holds up so well. You don't play that game and think like, I wish I had an extra button, or I wish I had, camera control's not an issue because it wasn't an issue, and things like that, Whereas you get into like 95, 96, 97, some of the best 3D games from that era don't necessarily hold up as well because of exactly what I just said. I wish I had a second analog stick. Something like that.
Right. It's just, they are just masters, and you said masters of the craft and masters of the technology. Like they just knew how to make games well with that technology. So I think it is a really beautiful sweet spot. It's not my favorite of the series, but it's definitely a top 3 depending on the day.
Yeah, I could say maybe as a kid with lots of time, that game being as unguided as it was, because eventually like you would get to a point where it's like, yeah, you need to go get this thing to go to the next area, but it wouldn't really tell you where that thing is. It might give you a description like, oh, it's in the desert, and you wouldn't know where the desert is until you went there. So it was like one of those things that kind of promoted exploration, especially with all like the hidden secrets. I think we mentioned that before, but just, exploring that world and kind of giving you that freedom. And a lot of people have like, I'm not going to relate it to Souls games, but I kind of am, in that Zelda, at least Link to the Past, was like a hub world, right? Like you kind of opened at this one place that was your safe spot, and then you could go to any direction. And yes, they would gate certain areas because you needed, the hook shot or whatever, whatever tool to get to the next thing. But so does Dark Souls. Like they do the same thing where you need this key to get in this thing, or you need to talk to this person so you can open up that door. And that's kind of what Zelda did, Link to the Past, what it did in this little like 16-bit world that they created. And I just remember just being blown away about the scope of it. And again, looking back, like it's really, nothing compared to today's standards, but like at that time I'd experienced like a lot of side scrollers, so like it was left to right, and that was basically it. Like Final Fantasy was in there, but it was like Trevor was mentioning, it was, you just had to go to the next town, or a very linear way of getting there. And this was kind of like, whoa, I can do anything. Oh, I'm dead. All right, I'm getting down that one heart with the beeping. But yeah, it was kind of like that cool transition into this new open world that I could explore.
Yeah, what was your experience with Link to the Past when you finally got around to playing it?
I really like Link to the Past. I think it as you said, it solves a lot of the problems that the original Zelda did. It's so much easier also as a the way the enemies are. It's like you feel like you actually have a chance, where the original Zelda was NES hard, you might say. So many different enemies, like they move in diagonal and Link can only move in 90-degree angles kind of things. There's so many like different patterns of projectiles and all this kind of stuff in the screen, which is fine, I guess, for the time. But yeah, Link to the Past it's a deeper story. It is way more player friendly. Of course, the colors and the music are vastly improved, just thanks to the platform that it was on. So I really like Link to the Past. Again, not as much as I think I would have fallen in love with it if I'd been able to play it as a kid. But, my experience going through it as an adult, I really like it. It's a great game.
play that game now, what strikes you about it?
That is still fun after all these years.
Yeah.
It's still just pretty. It still looks good. It hasn't well, that's one thing about sprite graphics. Everything still looks good. I mean, I still just love the art style of Link to the Past. And then all the memories come flooding back of childhood and playing it and learning the game. I mean, hell, to the right of me, I have a little poster thing I made when I worked at FedEx that has a sprite of Link and Zelda in the cathedral and has my name of me and my wife on there and our wedding date.
Oh, cool.
Partly so I don't forget our wedding date. But that's what she said. You only made this so you wouldn't forget the wedding. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I have that. And I use those sprites. I mean, I had any Zelda I could have chose from. I'm just using Photoshop and the sprites. I mean, but for me, it's always that Link and that Zelda because, again, childhood. It's the first Zelda game that I played, the first Zelda game that I was experienced to it at a very formulated age. So it always will be Link to the Past. Just for that reason alone. I mean, the rose-colored goggles.
Yeah, and I think nostalgia definitely plays into it a bit. But there's tons of games. Yeah, exactly, right? It's still a great game. Like, the design and nuts and bolts are really fantastic and kind of transcend any of that. The other stuff, the stuff you were discussing, like, the nostalgia classes. Because I know people who will play Legend of Zelda for the first time, and again, who will play Link to the Past for the first time on stream, and they're just as blown away without any knowledge or recollection of if they played it as a kid or not having played it as a kid.
Well, yeah, it's still a great game. Like, that's one thing that's so nice about it. It holds up.
And as we close the curtain on this 2-part Link to the Past episode, what better way to finish things off than just throw all the little random sound clips and ideas and thoughts and topics that didn't make it into a traditional segment here at the end for everyone to enjoy. I love doing this. This is, for me, really fun because this is just little side stories and little bits of the fandom and of the game that we just sometimes take for granted and don't really think about. Starting us off with a hot take, a spicy hot take, is the one and only Ryan, aka Games Without Coffee, and please let me take this opportunity to congratulate him on the birth of a new little espresso. Congratulations, man. We are all really, really stoked for you here and throughout the retro gaming community. We love you, we love your family, and we wish you nothing but the best and happiness and sleep. Sleep. Blessed, blessed sleep. Coffee's going to start us off talking about Link to the Past, his hot take, and then Redox PDX and Mike Albertin talk about randomizers. Oh boy. Link to the Past randomizers. Did you play a lot of Link to the Past when you were...
No, actually, I'd never got into Link to the Past until I emulated it when I was when I was in my teens. I never had a Super Nintendo, and I didn't I didn't really know anybody who had a Link to the Past for the Super Nintendo. So that game just kind of flew off my radar until I actually got into it. And believe it or not, I mean, I know there's a big hype on Link to the Past, but to me it's just like, I've played every other ones, and then I played Link to the Past, and it's just like, okay, it's great, and I see why it's such an iconic game, but it doesn't draw me the same way like say Zelda 2 did when I first played that. That Zelda 2 just instantly was like beloved. I love that game to death. But like Link to the Past, where like everyone was like, "Oh my God, it's the best Zelda game ever," and I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see that, but it's not the best Zelda game to me. So
why?
It's great.
Why
Zelda
isn't
game.
it?
It's a lovely Zelda game. It's fantastic. The duality between the Dark World and Light World, the gathering of the 8 maidens, the lore of the Triforce being explored in depth in this Super Nintendo title. I think it was the purple hair. The first lead is just like, Link has purple hair. That's kind of weird for me. I could never get over that. It's just, why do you have purple hair?
That's fair.
And I don't know. It didn't draw me in the same nostalgia as everyone else did. It's just like, oh, this is a great, fantastic, absolutely gorgeous Zelda game, but it just didn't. I don't know. It just didn't capture me the same way that like Zelda 2 or even Link's Awakening drew me in.
And I think. Know. And I think where you're at there is you can recognize it as a good game, right? Like you can look at it objectively and say, okay, this collection of pixels and sounds really is, it's a good game. But for some reason, it didn't connect with you, probably because you didn't play it of its time.
Yeah.
If you play that after The Legend of Zelda, again, a lot of people slept on The Adventure of Link, Zelda 2. So you're going from The Legend of Zelda to Link to the Past, which really is just this 16-bit upgrade. That's like a 2.5 times upgrade from the original Legend of Zelda. So it's the formula everyone likes. Not many people liked Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2. Of its day, I don't know if it was looked down on of its day. I don't remember it. I don't know a lot of people who had it.
Yeah.
I knew a ton of people who had Link to the Past. I did not have it either. I had a cousin who had it. We played it when we were there, and I played it at friends' houses, but I never owned it, and again, I've played it on emulation just like you. But I think what you're saying is that the nostalgia of Link to the Past may be pushing that game up the list a bit for a lot of people. Is that would you think that's fair?
I'd say that's a very fair assertion. I mean, there's like, again, I'll stress this out for people to, so that people don't have to fight me on this. A Link to the Past is a fantastic game. It's on my top 7. I'll tell you that for sure.
It's the top 7. You can fight the power and just be different. You don't have to be like, I don't have to apologize for your opinions.
I know, but I do have to state that because A Link to the Past is a very important game in the Zelda series and in the Zelda mythos. But just I feel like I don't know, and this is my personal opinion. I think that nostalgia has a lot to do with it because a lot of people did skip over Zelda 2. They disregarded it as just like the black sheep of the series, or like again, like you said, it was AVG end and Game Grumps to death. It's kind of a travesty in my opinion. But then again, I've always been the kind of person that enjoyed the more unsung heroes of video games rather than like what's mainstream. So maybe that's just me being weird, but
hey, listen,
my opinion is that Zelda 3 is a great game, but it's also made great because of its nostalgia and its nostalgia factor. It's a game of its time, and it is a wonderful, wonderful game. But again, it's a game of its time, and if you didn't play it at that time, you're not going to get the same connection as you would, say, later on when you play it for the first time or something like that. Or when you played other Zelda games. Sorry, I keep cutting you off. Or when you played other Zelda games first prior to playing A Link to the Past and saying, "Oh, okay, that's a game. It's awesome and it's great, but it doesn't connect with me." So there.
One thing that keeps it fresh for me now, though, is the amazing randomizer community that exists. And if you're familiar with any of the randomizer community kind of groups out there, Link to the Past is one of the biggest ones, where you can program a randomized version of the game where it mixes everything up. And so it's like playing your favorite game for the first time all over again. Things feel familiar, but they're in different places, and it's a different experience. And I love really just soaking up all those differences and finding the fun, quirky humor and how things play out. It's really fun.
I've seen some Zelda Link to the Past randomizers. They're bonkers. I watch it and I'm always amazed. And I haven't tried it myself, but they are a good watch when I see them on Twitch or wherever else. I really enjoy watching people play Link to the Past for the first time. It's really a fun thing, like on Twitch when I see that. And I also really love randomizers. And I've never tried my hand at it, but man, do they look really fun and cool.
No, thank you. I have tried one. I've tried it once with Final Fantasy VI because a good mutual friend of ours that we both know, Michael Hughes, would try to get. He would play randomizers, and I think he did a Link to the Past randomizer also. And I remember me and him talking about it a whole bunch. And I'm just like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah, but it's just so fun to have everything kind of turned on its ear.
I don't like that. I like knowing what's expected of me. I like knowing what's over there. Like, example, when I played the first Legend of Zelda this past month, I printed a map that told me where all the secret caves are, where all the secret items were, and I put it down, and that's how I played. I didn't do it with Link to the Past because it's all in my head. So, Link to the Past is one of those games that I have most of the game memorized. I didn't need a whole lot of guides because I've experienced the game so many times. Like, I know exactly where to go, what to do, where this is. Like, it's all in there somewhere.
You know, one of these days, I'm going to give randomizers a real try. I think that would be a really fun Twitch Tuesday night if I ever get the chance to get back to Twitch streaming on Tuesdays. I was doing that for a while, but I just kind of fell off the show, life, kids, the usual song and dance. But I would like to get back to that. I think randomizers would be a fun experiment on ye old Twitch channel. I have one. Feel free to follow it. I haven't done anything on it in 3 months, but by all means, feel free. I've done enough promotion on this show already. Rounding the episode out is the Reverend D talking about how Link to the Past really feels alive. Ryan Payne talking about what he would say to a 16-bit first-timer. Mike Albertin completely blows my mind out of my ears with some amazing revelations that I had no idea existed. And then finally, Seth Sergil lands the plane in only the way he can by giving his Link to the Past elevator pitch.
Yes, it feels a very lived in. It feels like a lived in world.
Yes.
Yeah. I totally agree, and I think there is some value to that, because before then, like in Zelda 2, you had people in the towns, but they would usually just mutter 2 words and not be helpful, or mutter 5 words and be like, "Oh, great, that doesn't help me at all." In this world, in this game, of course, with the Super Nintendo and the ability to generate different characters and sprites, it puts it to good use to make those villages really feel alive.
Oh, definitely. That was one of the things with the original Zelda. You had the old man in the cave, and you might have had a couple of merchants, but other than that, it was just a world overrun by monsters.
Which is cool in itself, right? That sense of loneliness and just, sense of loneliness. Again, not replicated until Breath of the Wild. The corollaries between the original Legend of Zelda and Breath of the Wild are extraordinary. It's bizarre how similar those games are in theme and scope. Not scope, but in theme and in like core design. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, one of these days I'll get to Breath of the Wild further down this down this road. That's gonna be a ways down there. Very cool. If you had to introduce somebody, I'll even do this, I'll take it one step further. If you had to introduce a young person, someone below the age of 18, like teenager style,
sure,
to the SNES, what would be the game you would first point them to?
Oh, it's a tough one. Below the age of 16. The thing is, too, I guess I would probably first ask, what are you into? So that would, of course, be that. But
and he's gonna be him or her will, let's say high school age, and him or her will be like, I'm into nothing. I like Minecraft and I like Fortnite. And you're like, all right, well, I have no connection to either of those things, young lady or man. So, yeah, what do you think? What do you think that entry point? Like this game explains why I love 16-bit games. And this question comes from, at my church youth group, I was talking with one of the kids who was there, and he's like 7th grade, and he goes, I would never play a retro game. Why would you play all those pixelated, garbage-looking graphics when I can play in 4K, 60 frames, PC Master Race? And it broke my heart a little bit. I mentioned this on the show. It just kind of broke my heart. Like, dude, you're never going to get a chance to play like Super Metroid, which is damn near perfect. You're not going to experience that. That sucks. So what would be that? That's the kid. What would you hand that kid and say, look, do me a favor tonight. Play this game. If you hate this game, then never play another retro game again. What would that be?
It'd probably be Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past.
Wow, interesting. Okay, why is that?
So I think for one, it's easy to get into, and it takes a little bit of time to master. So there's the kind of ease into it. So it's not like it's immediately something where it's the quote unquote Nintendo hard, which is what I often run into with my nieces and nephews when we want to play Nintendo games. They go, "This is really hard." It's something where you're not immediately pushed off by it, but as you're starting to gain some of the challenges and get into it a little bit more and more over time, it really grabs you, and then all of a sudden it flips on kind of the story and what your experience is with it, with the different worlds in which you get a chance to, and that's where I think that it kind of puts its tendrils into you and keeps you there. So and not again, if you're going from just a music perspective, it's also it's visually it's yes, I get it. It's not in 4K and it's not you're not going to see the sweat off of someone's head, but it's still not ugly. No. So it's certainly something that's colorful and bright, and the atmosphere as well, where it's the use of rain, I think, is really well done in it. So I think that would bring somebody in to go, okay, I'll give this a shot.
I think it's an excellent pick. I really do, because you kind of hit on all the big points. It's aesthetically pleasing, like you said, right? It's a very pretty game. It's a nice to look at. It also introduces story. So you have like that story, you have that rain, you have that atmosphere, you have your uncle dying to get your sword, right? That's drama. That's stuff that modern games try to do. The play, of course, is simple to pick up and understand and hard to master. Right. And with a kid, you have like 15 minutes, but really if you can get them an hour into Link to the Past, I think you can get them. I think you got them.
Oh yeah, they're hooked. Absolutely.
If you can get an hour through and maybe get the joy of going through a dungeon, some basic puzzles, get that first pendant, boom. I think that's an excellent gateway into 16-bit where a kid will be like, huh, all right, that's an excellent pick. Good job, man. Very good. I will not ask that question ever again.
Before you go on, did you know there's a second Zelda game for Super Nintendo?
Actually,
there's three.
What?
There's actually 3 Zelda games for Super Nintendo.
I don't wait. What?
I'm
what
not
is
kidding
going
either.
On now? Wait. What?
There's 3 games for Super Nintendo. The Zelda games.
And they are.
One is called BS Zelda. This is a real game. BS is, I forget what it stands for, the Stella View, which we never got in America. And it's a remake of Zelda 1 on Super Nintendo.
All right, listen, you're now just trolling me.
No, you can look this up. If you search BS Zelda on YouTube, it's a real game that came out the Stella View. The Stella View is that broadcast thing in Japan where you could hook your Super Nintendo up to the internet, sort of, and you have like hour windows to play this before the satellite moved or however it worked, and you were done, and it closed it out. And BS Zelda, at least, I don't like that name, but it's a remake of the original Zelda. I've only played it a little bit. It's a clean-looking game, but it is something that, since I know you're doing a history, that very few people have probably talked about. I played it a little bit when I got into ROMs and emulation, because it's on the internet, of course.
Nobody's mentioned this at all.
Nobody will.
That's why. So weird. I'm pulling up a video now.
It's actually pretty cool. Like, when I played it, oh God, it'd been years. It handled fine. It was fun. It's a good remake. The graphics are better.
Look at this. This is like Super Mario All-Stars meets Legend of Zelda.
Yeah, but it never came to America officially in any sense. I mean, it's translated, of course, because ROM's an emulation, but that's the only way to experience this game now is by emulating it.
This is crazy. This
the
is
graphics
really
are cleaner.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those random things that people don't know exists, and since this is what you do, I'm like, I'm going to surprise them.
That is pretty neat. Okay, so now you said one. Now, where's the second one? You said
the second one is another Stella View game, which is kind of a add-on to Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. It's the same map, but it's called Ancient Stone Tablets. And I've never played it, but I know they use a lot of the same assets and kind of regenerated things and made new dungeons.
Okay.
And I have no experience with it. I've been meaning to play it for years. It's been on my list. Also, never came to America either, but emulation, it's there.
And these are not official releases by Nintendo?
These are official Zelda games. These are official Nintendo games.
Wow, this is cool.
They just were only on the Stella View. And since the Stella View never came to America, Nintendo doesn't really like republishing things sometimes.
I don't know why. This is so neat.
Because Ancient Stone Tablets, from what I understand, is like you're a kid who gets sucked into this world or something of that nature.
This
also,
is the player character is not Link, who is absent from the game, but in fact the avatar is the player's ID from the BSX broadcasting system drawn into Hyrule and who would come to be known as the Hero of Light. This is bonkers. I did not wake up this morning expecting to hear about two different SNES.
You asked what Zelda means to me, and I have the facts for you.
Those are the facts.
And this game was also broken into episodes because the idea with Ancient Stone Tablets, because you only have a certain window to play the game, you would play through a section with a time limit, and then you go on, and then you'd have to wait until the next, whenever they did it, when they went to it again, and you could play the second episode and keep going.
This is bonkers. This is so
someday I have to play it. I mean, I can't. I have it. I have a version of it, but I've just it's the same world. Link to the Past. I mean, Link to the Past world, but it's a completely different game.
The game is divided into 4 separate episodes, each of which is playable for 60 minutes. Each episode focuses on a specific region of Hyrule, with much of the land inaccessible in the earlier episodes. This is bizarre. Wow. Very cool, man. I had no idea this even existed. Hey, listeners, BS, The Legend of Zelda, Ancient Stone Tablets, and whatever the hell the other one was called.
It's just called Legend of Zelda. If you search BS Zelda Super Nintendo,
they'll both come up.
The internet will find it for you.
Gotcha for you. That is cool. I love this. This is great. I want to give this a try. This first one also looks really neat. It's reskinned Zelda.
Yeah, I mean, they both have been on my list for years to play. I just have never done it I've never played Ancient Stone Tablets at all. I have played BS Zelda for a little bit, but I wasn't into it. I didn't really care. I was just there. It was many years ago.
Right. Very, very cool. So,
I mean, there's also ROM hacks Link to the Past, but that's not licensed stuff. But yeah, there's other stuff too.
The fact this is an officially licensed game by Nintendo is out of this world. Yeah.
It's a real game.
That's really cool. I love it.
They should really remarket and will not, but that's Nintendo for you.
That is Nintendo.
Like you throw this on a collection. I would play it. So would other people.
I think a lot of people would play reskin Legend of Zelda and this weird amalgamation of BS Zelda. That's really funny. Well, I did not wake up this morning again expecting to hear about 3 SNES Zeldas instead of the one we all know and love.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Any other thoughts on Link to the Past? Even just something more of, I don't know. Here's the question. What would you say to somebody who's new to retro games, right? Maybe younger than you and I, maybe say 10 years younger, right? Adult, but younger adult. Someone who's dabbling in it, right? And they say, why should I play Link to the Past? People say this thing is great, but I have limited amount of time. What would be the pitch for you?
I would say that it's still, I think there are a lot of things about Link to the Past that are really timeless, even still today. Like that, first of all, the game is gorgeous. Like I still think that the pixel art in A Link to the Past is some of the best of all time. Like I still can pick up that game and it just it's beautiful to look at. Again, the tone, the atmosphere. I also think it plays just very fluidly. Like it might be, in my opinion anyway, the easiest Zelda game to just pick up and play. It has a really great sense of pacing and flow to it. And so I'd be really curious to know what the modern gamer would sort of feel approaching this game for the first time. But my pitch to them would be kind of take a look at this game through that lens and what it did well, and put themselves in that period of time, which is kind of what I try to encourage people to do when they play retro games anyway, because when you go back to a retro game, not everything is going to be timeless. There are elements of A Link to the Past that I think are fairly timeless, but not everything is going to be that way. There are going to be some obscure, kind of moments that maybe don't stand the test of time. For that, I always recommend, and I think I said this last time we talked too, if you feel like you need to use a guide, use a guide.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Sure. Like, don't feel beholden to anything. Just have fun and get lost in this world. Feel connected to it. Get lost in the atmosphere of it.
About a week ago, my son played The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past for the very first time. And he was amazed. To quote him, it was amazing! A few days ago, I handed him the Switch after replacing a broken screen protector. He broke it. This is what kids do. No damage to the system, but I had to fix the issue. So I hand him the system and I say, "Hey, here you go, Will. What are you going to play?" And he said, "A Link to the Past." And my dad heart got a little bigger. And then he said, "And can we put it on the TV? Because I'd like to play with you." And my dad heart got a whole lot bigger. Now, if you're not a parent or a guardian or around kids, this anecdote may not mean much to you, right? It may just go past you due to life experience or life stage, right? Maybe this is a memory that's really a feel-good one for me, right? Not one for public consumption. It's just too personal. But I think what that speaks to is to a game's timelessness. A 6-year-old with a million of different options available to him chose a 16-bit game made in the early 90s. And yeah, he wanted to play with me. He wanted to share the experience. And that's what timeless games do. That's what timeless art does. It survives the generations. It transcends taste and technology. It exists on a different plane, and in my opinion, it's nearly impossible to quantify. I can't put a finger on why Link to the Past is so timeless. It's got beautiful graphics, outstanding sound, gorgeous soundtrack, great gameplay, gripping story, awesome enemies, thought-provoking puzzles, and yet none of that really matters. Lots of games have that stuff. But there's a secret sauce that I just can't get my hand around that I think can only be extracted from the nostalgia of our memories. From the way we felt when we played that game for the first, second, 100th, or millionth time. Or in my case, from the wide-eyed wonder of a 6-year-old kid traversing Hyrule for the very first time. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. If you haven't done so already, check me out on Twitter at A Gamer Looks at 4040. Leave a rating and review on your pod player of choice if you feel led to do so. And you already heard about the Patreon things, so that's already covered. We have some really fun episodes coming up. So if you love Zelda, this is your home. Just move in for the next couple of months, because it's going to be quite the ride. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, continue to be amazed.